My brother asked me to deceive our parents to steal $50,000 from them, but when Dad discovered the truth, he disinherited him, and now he works for me as my employee for 2 years, or he loses everything forever. I'm 28 years old, work in logistics, and just started my own shipping business. And what happened a few months ago with my older brother basically blew up our family in a way I never thought possible. I guess I should start at the beginning, when my brother Kenneth got married about 5 years ago to Heather, because that's when everything started to change. Though at the time, none of us saw it coming. I mean, we thought it was normal for a newly married guy to want to spend time with his wife and his new in-laws, right? Kenneth is 30 years old, 2 years older than me, and we grew up pretty close, honestly. Our dad, Raymond, was a heart surgeon until he retired a few years ago, and my mom, Carol, was a journalist before she left her career to raise us. We lived well, very well actually, and we always knew we were fortunate, but our parents never spoiled us. Like, Dad always said that money is earned through hard work, and that he wasn't going to raise two useless sons who just waited for their inheritance. Kenneth and I were close as kids. We did everything together. Sports, video games, all that stuff, and honestly, I thought it would always be like that. But then he met Heather when he was 25. She was 24 at the time, worked in marketing or something like that. And from the beginning, I noticed there was something weird about her, like this obsession with appearances and material things that made me uncomfortable. I remember the first family dinner when he brought her home, and she wouldn't stop asking about my parents' house, how much it cost, if the art on the walls was original, that kind of thing you just don't ask, you know? But Kenneth was in love, or whatever it was, and they got married like a year after they started dating. After the wedding, things changed gradually. At first, it was small things, like Kenneth wouldn't come to family dinners on Sundays because Heather had plans with her family, or he'd cancel hangouts with me because his mother-in-law needed help with something. Then he started missing birthdays, anniversaries, those kinds of events he never used to miss. My mom would cry sometimes. I'd hear her talking to Dad at night, saying she felt like she'd lost her son, and Dad would try to calm her down, saying it was a phase, that Kenneth would come back when the honeymoon period wore off. But he didn't come back. Years passed, and we saw him less and less. When we did see him, Heather was always there, controlling the conversation, talking about her family, about how much money her dad made, comparing everything to us in a super uncomfortable way. Kenneth transformed into another person. He started talking differently, acting differently, like more pretentious, and at the same time more distant. He stopped calling me, stopped responding to my messages beyond an okay or an emoji. It was painful. I'm not gonna lie, because I basically lost my brother and didn't understand why. Meanwhile, I continued with my life. I'd been with my girlfriend Allison for about 7 years. She's 26 and literally the most calm and level-headed person I know. And I was working in logistics for a big company while saving up to start my own business. My parents supported me a lot, Dad especially. He always gave me business advice, and Mom made sure Allison and I came to dinner every week. It was nice. I mean, we had a normal, healthy family relationship, exactly what Kenneth had abandoned. About 6 months ago, I proposed to Allison. It was at the beach, nothing super elaborate but special, and she said yes, obviously. We were happy, planning the wedding, talking about the future, and like 2 weeks after that, Allison told me she needed to tell me something important. I got a little scared, not gonna lie, but then she told me she was pregnant. It wasn't planned, like we were using protection and everything, but it happened anyway, and after the initial shock, we got pretty excited. I was 28, she was 26, we were engaged anyway. What did it matter if the baby came a little earlier than planned? We told my parents and they went crazy with happiness. Mom cried. Dad hugged me so hard he almost broke my ribs, and we decided to have a celebration dinner at their house to officially announce the engagement and pregnancy to the extended family. Obviously, we invited Kenneth and Heather, though I didn't expect them to come because they hadn't shown up to any family events for like 6 months. But to my surprise, they said they would come. The night of the dinner, they arrived late, like half an hour late, and Heather came in with this huge fake smile that immediately gave me a bad feeling. Everyone was there, my aunts and uncles, some cousins, close friends of my parents, and Allison and I announced the engagement and the baby. There were applause, hugs, champagne, all very nice. And then Kenneth stands up and says, "Well, we also have an announcement." My heart dropped because I knew he was going to say something that would ruin the moment. And I was right. Kenneth and Heather announced they were also pregnant. They said they'd been trying for years, that they'd spent all their money on IVF treatments, and that it had finally worked. For a second, I thought, okay, this is good. We're going to have babies at the same time. Our kids will be close cousins in age. But then I saw Heather's face, and I knew there was more. Kenneth continued, saying they were in serious financial trouble because the treatments had cost them like $80,000, and they'd depleted their savings and credit cards. The atmosphere got super awkward, like people didn't know whether to congratulate them or console them, and I just wanted the night to be over. After everyone left, Kenneth asked me to talk privately. We went to Dad's study, and he closed the door. What he told me next still makes my blood boil when I think about it. Basically, he asked me to lie to our parents, to tell them I needed money for my business. I don't know, like $50,000 or something, and when Dad gave me the money, I'd pass it to him. He told me we could split it then, like I'd keep $20,000 and he'd get $30,000, as if it were a super normal business deal and not a complete betrayal of our parents. I sat there staring at him like he'd grown another head. I said, "Are you crazy? Are you seriously asking me to deceive Mom and Dad?" And he started with this speech about how we were brothers, how family helps each other, how I didn't understand how difficult it was for him and Heather. I told him no, absolutely not, that if he needed money he should talk directly to Dad like an adult. Then he changed tactics and told me that if I wouldn't help him with the plan, at least I should make him a partner in my new shipping business that was about to start. That's when I got really angry. My business was something I'd worked on for years. I'd saved every penny. I'd made all the plans, gotten the permits, the clients, everything, and he wanted to be a partner without having done anything, just because he was my brother. I told him no, that he hadn't been present in my life for 5 years, that he knew nothing about my business or about shipping, and that I wasn't going to give away a percentage of something I'd worked so hard for. He got furious and left slamming the door. I thought that was the end of it, but like 2 weeks later he showed up at my house, alone this time, without Heather. He came with this super different attitude, like humble and repentant, and told me we needed to talk. He told me this story about how he had sacrificed his first choice university so I could go to mine because Dad couldn't afford both at the same time or something like that. He said he had wanted to go to an expensive university on the East Coast, but had chosen a cheaper state university so I could go to the one I wanted, and that now I owed him for that sacrifice. He made me feel bad for a second. Honestly, because I didn't know anything about that. He'd never mentioned it to me. But something didn't add up. Kenneth is 2 years older than me, so when he was choosing universities, I was in my sophomore year of high school, and I remember perfectly that he only applied to state universities because his grades weren't that good. So after he left, I drove to my parents' house to ask them about this story of the supposed sacrifice. Dad was in his study, and when I asked him, his face turned red. He told me Kenneth was a liar, that he had never been accepted to any expensive East Coast university, that in fact his grades and test scores barely qualified for state universities, and that Kenneth had asked them to bribe a private university to accept him, which Dad flatly refused to do. I felt betrayed in a way I can't explain. My own brother had tried to manipulate me with an elaborate lie to get money or participation in my business. I told Dad everything Kenneth had asked me about the plan to deceive them and get money from them, and I watched his expression go from anger to deep disappointment. Mom came into the study, and when we told her what was happening, she started crying, saying it was her fault, that she had been too permissive with Kenneth, that she should have raised him better. Dad hugged her and told me to block Kenneth, not to let him into my house, that he was going to handle this. I blocked Kenneth on everything, phone, social media, everything, but like 3 days later, he and Heather showed up at my house. Allison opened the door and they basically pushed their way in without an invitation. I was in the living room working on my laptop, and when I saw them come in, I stood up. Kenneth started yelling at me, saying I was selfish, that I had betrayed him, that I had gone running to Dad like a tattletale kid. Heather also started screaming, saying we were a shitty family, that her family would never treat one of their own like this, that we were all stuck up with our money. Allison, bless her, got between them and me and told them to leave or she'd call the police. Kenneth pointed his finger at me and said, "This isn't going to stay like this. You're going to regret turning your back on me." They finally left, but I was shaking with rage. I called Dad immediately and told him what had happened. Dad was so angry he could barely speak, and Mom was crying inconsolably in the background. They told me not to worry, that they were going to resolve this. About a week later, Dad's lawyer contacted Kenneth and informed him that Dad was modifying his will. Basically, Kenneth was going to be almost completely disinherited. He was only going to receive a collection of antique watches that Dad had, and nothing else. No money, no properties, no stocks, nothing. The house, the investments, everything was going to be for me. I hadn't asked for that. In fact, I felt uncomfortable with the situation. But Dad was firm. He said Kenneth had shown his true character and that he wasn't going to reward that behavior. Kenneth showed up at my house again like 2 weeks later, but this time he came alone and with a completely different attitude. He knocked on the door like a normal person, waited for me to open it, and when I saw him, his eyes were red like he'd been crying. He apologized, said he'd been an idiot, that Heather had been pressuring him for years to get money from Dad, that he knew it was wrong, but he felt desperate. He told me he needed my help to fix things with Dad, that if I talked to him, maybe Dad would forgive him. I told him to come in and we talked for hours. He told me things I didn't know, like how Heather had been manipulating him from the beginning, how she came from a family that was always borrowing money and never paying it back, how she had made money the center of their marriage. He said he regretted distancing himself from us, that he missed the family, that he wanted his son to know his grandparents and his uncle. Part of me felt sorry for him, but another part was still angry about everything he'd done. I told him I'd talk to Dad, but that I wasn't promising anything. I called Dad and explained that Kenneth had come, that he seemed genuinely repentant, and that maybe we should give him a chance. Dad was silent for a long time and then said, "Okay, tell him to come to the house tomorrow. We're going to talk, the three of us." The meeting was brutal. Dad basically humiliated Kenneth, told him he was a disappointment, that he'd betrayed the values they'd raised him with, that he was a liar and a manipulator. Kenneth cried, begged for forgiveness, said he'd do whatever it took to fix things. Mom cried too, but didn't say anything. She was just there, with her arms crossed. I felt super uncomfortable, like I wanted to disappear, but I knew I had to be there. After like an hour of this, Dad finally said, "I have a solution, but you're not going to like it." He told Kenneth that if he really wanted to prove he'd changed and that he deserved his inheritance, he had to work to earn it literally. The condition was that Kenneth would work in my shipping business under my orders as a regular employee for at least 2 years. If in that time he proved he was trustworthy, hardworking, and honest, Dad would restore his inheritance. But if he quit or I reported any behavioral problems, he'd lose everything forever. Kenneth looked at me like asking me to say something, but I didn't say anything. The truth is, I didn't know how to feel about it. On one hand, I didn't want to work with him after everything that had happened, but on the other hand, it was an opportunity for him to fix his life and our relationship. Kenneth finally accepted. What other option did he have? And Dad said that in the meantime, he'd help them with some medical expenses from the pregnancy and give them a loan to stabilize their debts, but with a formal contract and everything. It's been like 3 months since that. Kenneth started working in my business about 6 weeks ago. At first, it was super weird, like he's my older brother, but now he's my employee. And I give him orders and he has to follow them. But I've noticed he's really making an effort. He arrives early, stays late, doesn't complain, learns fast. Heather is still a problem. I mean, she still makes passive-aggressive comments when they come to family dinners. But Kenneth at least now tells her to shut up when she crosses the line. Allison is like 5 months along now. You can see her little belly and we're excited. Heather is 6.5 months. Seeing our partners pregnant at the same time is weird, but also kind of beautiful in a way. Like, despite all the drama, our kids are going to grow up together if things keep improving. Dad and Mom are calmer now. Mom doesn't cry as much, and Dad has started talking to Kenneth more, though there's still tension there. I don't know if our relationship will go back to the way it was before. Honestly, I doubt that will happen. But at least now Kenneth is in our lives again. He's doing the work to earn his place, and that's something. The other day we were loading boxes in the warehouse, and he said to me, "Thanks for not giving up on me." I know I didn't deserve another chance. I didn't respond to him in that moment because I still don't know what to say, but I guess the fact that he's there, working, trying, already says something. The thing is, Dad was right when he said money is earned through hard work, that nobody owes you anything just for existing or for being family. Kenneth had to learn that the hard way, and he still has a long way to go. But he's here, he's trying, and that's more than he did in the last 5 years. We'll see what happens in the coming months, if he can really maintain this change, or if he's going to fall back into his old patterns. For now, I'm trying to keep my expectations low and focus on my own future, with Allison and our baby. That's what really matters at the end of the day, I guess.